Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. I think that I am uniquely well qualified just to get myself in trouble, especially with all the experts that are up here on the stage today. So we'll get right into it, but I just want to preface this by saying that at least in Teton County, Wyoming, and I'm sure also in Teton County, Idaho, the hospital and the school district are really the two biggest community organizations in those communities, and also the biggest employers, at least in Teton County, Wyoming, the biggest non-seasonal employers, along with the village on a seasonal basis in the community. So they're not just critical from a life standpoint, I guess, in some ways. So they're also critical from an economic perspective, and they're critical from a vibrancy perspective, I would argue, in both sides of the hill. So it's really an important discussion to have, and I think healthcare and education, hits every single person in this room and every single person in life in general. So without much further ado, we will move to Dr. Paul Beaupre, who is the CEO of St. John's Medical Center, St. John's Health, I think it's becoming. Yes. And take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the themes I think we're all grappling with in the room today is the sustainability of the area that we so much love, and that's Teton County. There are a lot of studies out that say that 3 essential pieces of long-term sustainability for rural areas are a comprehensive health delivery system, a good school system, and a good care for the elderly. And so I want to just give you some facts right now about what's happening in rural health care. Since the year 2000, 120 rural hospitals have closed in America. And the Kaiser Association just came out with a study that said that of the 2,800 rural hospitals that are left in America, 450 of those that employ 150,000 people are on the verge of closing. What happens to a community when a rural hospital closes? Very first thing is you have to think about unemployment rates. Unemployment rates nationally, when a hospital closes in a rural community, goes up on average by about 2%. The per capita income to that same community goes down on average by about 9%. And then if you think about the human factor of what's going on, a woman that's pregnant all of a sudden doesn't have a place to deliver, has to drive or consider driving a month in advance to her delivery date so that she's around in case she goes into labor prematurely. People with heart disease, people at risk for stroke, where time is of the essence, all of a sudden aren't certain if they can remain in their communities any longer because the rural hospital is closed. Is St. John's immune to this? Well, of those 120 hospitals that closed since 2000, 48 of those hospitals had been in existence for over 100 years. So being in existence for a long time doesn't mean that you have a pass and that you're going to be in existence for a long time in the future. St. John's right now is currently doing, in this fiscal year, very close to $6 million of charity care. Now, we get mill money from the community, and we're very thankful for that mill money. That's about $3 million a year that we get in mill money from the community, which several years ago used to cover our charity care, but now it's only covering about half the charity care that we're doing in the community. So we have to look at revenue streams and how do we improve revenue. I can tell you for a fact that diversification is possible. When I first got here 3 years ago, 87% of the revenue generated at St. John's Hospital came from our orthopedic service line. And I said, we cannot survive as an institution if we're that reliant on one single service line. We are now down to about 62%, so we're still very heavily reliant on orthopedic. But we've had significant growth in general surgery. We've had significant growth in oncology, in cardiology, and in cardiopulmonary services. So we're beginning to diversify our own portfolio to ensure that we will have a more stable future as we go forward. Jonathan asked the question, what can I do about this? I believe that every community hospital has a sacred trust with the community it serves. And that trust is to provide the highest quality care that we can possibly provide to our community. And I'm proud to say that at St. John's, for the last 2 years running now, we've been rated as a 5-star hospital with CMS. That puts us in the top 252 hospitals in the country for our quality product that we're producing out of St. John's. I think that on a go-forward basis, my role in the position I'm in is to keep pressing the quality agenda so we're providing all of you the highest quality services that we can provide. What I need from you is support for the hospital. I need all of you to realize that St. John, even with its proud history, is a rural hospital and is at risk with the economic pressures that are on all rural hospitals, and we need your support. And I'll stop by saying I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the support that you have all shown us for the new living center, Sage Living. We're getting ready to go in the ground sometime this summer with the construction for the new living center, and it's a project that wouldn't be possible without the support that you've given us, both through the SPET that you gave us a couple years ago and through the philanthropic support that many of you have given us over the last couple of years as we've been going through the development phase for this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. On a personal note, I just want to say of that historical 87%, I think I've personally contributed about 50% to the orthopedic income at the hospital. So next we're going to move over to education, and I think we'll start with the chair of the Teton County Idaho School Board, Chris Isaacson. So it's all yours.
Thank you very much for having me here today. It's great to be able to talk about the services and our school district over on the other side of the mountain. It was fun last year to be here. One of the things that I'm going to focus in on, and I asked board, Teachers Association, and our superintendent, what would be that focus that we need to have? And ours is state support for our schools in funding. Many of us have talked about today how the local aspect is so very important. And I would say we're a model of the local aspect over in our area. We get about 66% of our school budget from the state legislature, from our Department of Ed. We have 97 teachers that we are funded for, and we have 113 teachers. And so what we have tried to do in our region is to expand, because the people who are there and the people who are coming into our valley are expecting excellence in education. And we want to be able to give that to them. And one of the ways to do that is to have the kind of high quality educators and the diverse and innovative programs that we need to have to satisfy our community. And so in doing that, we have to provide more teachers for smaller class sizes. We all know how that affects the educational process. And we also need to have the money for diverse programs, et cetera. So we then have to, as a community, go to our community and ask for support. And I just kind of put this up here just to kind of illustrate all the different areas that we utilize. The top part of that with school funding is the local input. We have the supplemental levy that we run every 2 years, and currently it's for $3.1 million each year. And then we'll go to our community again when that is completed and ask for more funds. And so our supplemental levy pays for 25% of our budget. And so that means if, and I think somebody, might have been Cindy who referred to it, we're right now trying to work through the decision and possible interactions that are happening due to many of the community wanting to change our mascot for the high school, for Redskins. So depending on our community, as people have talked about, relationships are extremely important. And so we have to look at the sides of all of that, the people from the past, the people who are now moving into our community, and looking at all of those aspects and trying to make a decision where everyone will still feel comfortable and joined in our community. So that could impact that supplemental levy. So there's a great aspect to have the input and relying on the local community, but there is the other aspect also of when we do, what if those funds weren't there? So what if those 16 teachers that we're currently funding would not be there, and the programs that go along with it. So it's kind of a two-edged sword in a way. So we have the supplemental levy. We also have our emergency levy, where during the beginning of the school year, after the first Monday in September, we look at new students and our enrollment, and if we are above a particular threshold based on our average daily attendance from the year before, then we can request about $400,000 to help support those new students within our district. Now, that doesn't have to be voted on, but that has to go through the commissioners and et cetera as we move forward, and that is also used for our programming. So we have the supplemental levy
Chris,
and emergency levy.
30 seconds.
I do this
Sorry,
all the
I know.
time.
It's the hardest job is telling you your time's limited.
It is. So this is one of our problems. We do get, as you see, state funding, and state funding in terms of mastery teachers, where teachers will get money from that, where we have our educational pass-through, and where we have our professional leadership premiums. So we have those kind of things. But here's an example. The state, the beginning pay in our state right now is $38,500. And the top of their eight cells is $50,000. $38,500, $50,000. That's for somebody who would have been working for 25 years. We pay at the top end, with all of this supplemental and adding to it, about $64,000. And we're constantly working on that. So we don't get what we need from the state. We do get wonderful things from our community who has changed a paradigm shift and is supportive of our school district, and likely is the $38 million bond we passed last year, 80% for. So we'll stop there.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And then the third member of our panel is Kate Mead. Her family has been in this valley for way longer than me and for longer than most of us. She's been on the board for, is this your first term?
This is my third.
Third term? Oh my gosh. Sorry about that. And we welcome her here and would love to hear your viewpoint, Kate.
Thank you very much. I'm very proud of Teton County School District. We've been recently rated as the top high school in the state of Wyoming. We have several blue ribbon schools in our district, and we just have the type of education that the people in Teton County want. Over my time working with school districts, 11 years, I've gone to national conferences, state conferences, and I've come to the conclusion that people get what they want in education. Those states who don't want to fund education get what they want, right? They get an undereducated populace. Those cities and towns who don't want to put money into education get what they want. Kids who maybe don't have the opportunities that our children in Teton County do. And we get what we want, and that's one of the best, in my opinion, school district in the state. So how are we funded? A lot of you probably are unfamiliar with that. Different than Idaho, our funding is based on the state paying a foundation grant. Now, this came about 20 years ago. In our Constitution, it says that every child will have the same equal education as every other child in our county or our state. So you can imagine when different counties had different funding mechanisms for schools, you weren't getting equity at all. So a couple of school districts brought lawsuits against the legislature, won in the Supreme Court, and the funding model that we have today is a result of those pieces of litigation. So what happens here in Teton County, about 35 mills, maybe 34, I can't remember, of your tax money, property taxes, goes to pay for schools. So some communities bring in way less than it costs to educate their kids. You know, some communities just don't have a big tax base. So when they don't have enough money, then the foundation pays money in to their schools so that each child gets an equal education, financially at least, as to others. So here in Teton County, we are called a recapture district now. 2 years ago, when our assessed valuation went up 17%, we became a recapture district. So we send about $4.5 million down to the state over and above what we keep to educate our kids here. Each child here in Teton County, we are provided with about $16,500. Sounds like a lot. It's a lot compared to a lot of states. But some of the small school districts, you can imagine, Washakie County school districts, you know, if you look at their numbers, they're getting $35,000 per student for the sole reason that you have economies of scale in bigger schools like we do here. So we are able to bring new teachers in at about $65,000 a year. We have incremental increases in what you make based on your educational level. Over 40% of our teachers have master's degrees or higher. And we encourage that by paying them more. We have a lot of PhDs in our school district, and we're very, very proud of their willingness to work in our school district when they could probably make more at the university level. Some statistics about our kids. This year, we have, unfortunately, quite a few kids, 81 students who have been designated McKinney-Vento status. That means they're, for all intents and purposes, homeless. So despite the fact that we're a very rich district, here we have homeless kids that we have to keep an extra eye on. We have a lot of kids who are food insecure. Several of our schools have a backpack program whereby some of the banks fill backpacks every weekend so kids have food at home over the weekend. We have a fairly large population, 27% of free and reduced lunch kids, and that is an indicator of poverty. But let's talk about the rest of Wyoming. Many school districts in the west of Wyoming have northwards of 80% free and reduced lunch. So we're doing very well here. We have a free pantry at Mummingburg Mountain Elementary School where kids can come in and get food for their weekends every Friday. They can go in there. It's pretty anonymous, so nobody feels badly about it, and they can go and get food. And here's a pitch. For only $40 annually, you too can make a donation that gives a child fresh fruit and vegetable snacks for the entire school year. You can give that to the Teton County Education Foundation, which just this month has its first full-time executive director. Teton County has, I can't remember, I think 23% of the non-English speaking learners in all the school districts across the state, 23% of them are here. And we only represent 3% of the school districts across the state. So we've become very good at teaching English language learners our language.
Kate, 30 seconds.
Our fundamental goal in our strategic plan is to make sure every darn third grader can read proficiently at grade level. This is so critical. Lots of times you hear school districts talk about coding and things like that. But the most important thing we feel we can do is to make sure that every child can read by third grade. And we're really, really working on that. It's our strategic plan 2022. And math, as well as writing. Those three things we think are critical to any American being able to function well in our society. So thanks. And if you have any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it very much. I'm gonna ask a couple of questions here, and we've sort of got two different industries or two fully different subject matters. So I might try and toggle between the two if that's okay with everybody. But I do want to start off with the first question. We've talked so much about sort of regionality and being able to get along with other communities. And I think both education and healthcare are beholden in some ways, especially financially, as Kate, you mentioned, and you mentioned as well, Chris, to different governmental entities. For the education component, it's primarily state. For the healthcare component, it's primarily federal when it comes to Medicare and Medicaid and those types of things. So I guess I would just ask all of you to just give me a quick take, or give everybody a quick take on how you deal with that type of component, how your relationships with the entities that are important to funding you, and whether or not we as a voice in Teton County, Idaho, and Wyoming, what we can do to have a voice either at the federal level or the state level or wherever to further the goals of the education and the healthcare systems here.
Well, we have right now at St. John's about 35 to 40% of our patients that are federally funded, Medicare and Medicaid. And Medicare pays about 50 cents on the dollar, and Medicaid pays about 30 cents on the dollar for health care. So we obviously need to look at other funding sources and revenue sources to try to keep a younger population engaged in healthcare. You mentioned that we're changing our name, and we are moving away from St. John's Medical Center to St. John's Health because we want Jackson to realize that we're not a place that you simply go when you're sick to get well. We're partners with the community in their journey in health when they're here at Jackson. And our two fastest growing departments at the hospital are our wellness department and our home health department. And I think that speaks volumes to the fact that we're moving outside the four walls of the hospital and really trying to engage with the community. A question on relationships with other communities. Both Fremont County and Sublette County have approached St. John's about helping them with the healthcare delivery system in both of those counties, and we're really happy to do it. We're not going to lose sight of the fact that our primary responsibility is to the people that live here within Teton County, but if we can, our mantra is keep healthcare close to home if possible, and if we can do satellite work at these other communities and help them with their healthcare needs, we're happy to do that as well.
Well, as a school district, we have close contact with the other school districts in the state, and we don't get the Teton County thing. We just don't. And I think the reason is because they look at us and they see a successful model. Hasn't always been that way. but it certainly is now. And the school districts are more united, I would say, with regards to pursuing funding and that sort of thing. But I would say to Paul, over $8 million of our $53 million budget is for health care of our employees. So you can see that we would love to spend a lot more money on kids, but that is something that we have to do. And our population in Teton County, our teachers are a very, very healthy group. They're marvelous, and they're great healthcare consumers, because we started health savings accounts for them about 7 years ago. And that's been very, very successful in making them great healthcare consumers. I was skeptical that they would get better and seek out lower cost healthcare, but they do it. So those things, if we can work together, statewide to improve the access to healthcare and the premium costs in our state, it would enable school districts all across the state to up the ante with regards to kids. And so sometimes we don't think about that, but just like any other employer, we have 589 employees, and all the full-time employees get health care that costs over $14,000 per person per year. So, and then we work with Teton County, Idaho. We have the kids from Alta Elementary School who, rather than once they have finished 6th grade now, but 5th grade next year, we're going to all K-5 schools, often go to school in 401, is it, district. And I can see why parents would do that. Your school district is better and better. For a long time, it was very difficult. And people would send their kids over the mountain to Jackson Hole Middle School after 6th grade. But now more and more kids are going to Idaho, and we're paying tuition to the Idaho schools to educate those kids. So we work together pretty closely.
And of course, that's one of our sources of revenue that I had up there, is our tuition. We work, and especially through our superintendent, work very closely with other school districts in Idaho. Also, our superintendent was selected by our state superintendent to represent Idaho in a regional aspect with Oregon and Idaho, et cetera. There are about 5 different states that are involved in that, to make decisions and to work together. So, we're not just working within our state. Our superintendent is representing the state and working with other states throughout the United States in our region. This might be a time to kind of jump on what Cindy was saying earlier about our Hispanic population. And how we're working and developing that. We have a Noche Familia, and that happens, about 4 or 5 times a year that our ELL coordinator has started. I just went to the last one, but we have had, especially around a holiday season, about 240 adults there at this happening. And not only are they Hispanic, but they are also non-Hispanic. So what has happened is we're bringing people together to work in the community. I would wish that at our meetings we would see more of the Hispanic population, but I'm very encouraged. The last one that I went to, we had about 70 community people there and through community agencies. And we broke up into groups to look at issues to help our ELL program develop their strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years in terms of what are we offering, how are we meeting the needs of families and students, et cetera. So not only are we doing that at the district level with schools, but also our individual programs such as that. So that's another way that we're reaching out within our community and bringing folks together. One last thing, if I may say, is when we were doing the bond last year, we brought the community together through focus groups. So we reached out to individuals. We had a facilitator from Teutonia to Victor and asked the hard questions and got to the hard answers. And so we tried to develop everything that we did around that. And of course, I think that that was very beneficial and helpful to pass the bond at 80% within our community and begin changing, as was said, the paradigms and the way that education is viewed within our community and what we offer.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. We have the shortest time because we have the smallest panel, and I do want to make sure that we can get to a couple of questions. So maybe just one more question each, and then we'll shoot on. When it comes to healthcare, Paul, price transparency and access. So, I was the COO of the hospital for several years, and yet I go in there and I'm still confused as to insurance versus copay versus deductibles versus coinsurance versus everything that's out there. The hospital does provide a fair amount of charity care, and of course, there's no free lunch. So somewhere you have to make up that revenue somehow. Talk to me about how you're trying to promote price transparency, because we want consumers to be able to make good decisions. And how we can improve people's view that they actually do have access, not that they should be fearful of going to the hospital because they can't afford it or whatever. So can you address that?
Healthcare is too expensive. It is, and it's something that we're going to be faced with and grapple with nationally. I think it's going to be one of the biggest election topics that we have. What we're doing locally right now on this is we do have a consortium from the village, from the school district, and from the Chamber of Commerce, all looking at a way that we can potentially, many of us are self-insured, the hospital is self-insured, and looking at a way that we could potentially go outside of our own self-insurances and look for a larger purchasing group to be able to lower the cost of healthcare and lower our premiums in healthcare. The other disconnect with the whole conversation about lowering healthcare cost is we have not had legislative relief so that if the physicians or the hospitals work at lowering costs, we can assure that those savings get passed on to the consumer. What none of us have an appetite for is to lower our pricing and our delivery and then have the savings get absorbed by the insurance companies. And so we need to have some dialogue about the fact that we will very much get into that game if we can assure that the savings goes to the consumer. The other thing that I think that you should know is that we are now mandated to be able to show our charge masters, and you can reach that on our website. You can go out and see what the charges are for everything that we do at the hospital. That's still confusing to patients. And what's very confusing to patients is when they finally get their hospital bill. And what we do have available for everybody in Teton County, and what people don't take advantage of enough, is when you get your hospital bill, instead of passing out, call the hospital and ask to speak to one of our financial counselors. Don't be embarrassed about making that call. We really encourage people to make that call. Many times we make mistakes on the bill, first of all. I'll be the first one to admit that. So challenging what you see on your bill is worth doing. And secondly, the educative process of being able to go through a bill at least one time and understanding why you're being charged what you're charged on that bill is worth all of you to go through at least once.
I think that's I appreciate that. I think telling people that they can call the hospital and get educated on the costs and why and what is very important. Back to to education. So this may be a little bit more of an issue on the Wyoming side of the fence versus Idaho. I'm not 100% sure, but we have a lot of choices here for schools, whether it's a public school district or a bunch of private schools that are in the area. And school districts don't have the luxury of taking who they want to take. They need to take all comers. So you have to be prepared for all comers, high achievers, low achievers, etc. Tell me how you deal with that, Kate, to start, with the other private schools in the area and what your relationship is, and how you make sure that you still have the funding and the resources that you can do to do the best for public school education. Then we'll go to Chris as well.
Thanks, Gary. Great question. So the private schools in Teton County, for those of you who are newish to Teton County, have not been here for all that long. So, you know, it's been we've had some growing pains over the years. But rather than have the private schools pay for their own sports teams and that sort of thing, which they could never do, those kids play on the high school sports teams. And they pay us the same amount that the state pays us per student for each of their kids. So those kids can participate in one sport a year for the same price as they can participate in 3 sports and other activities. So that's worked out really well. And we're really proud we've been able to do that. It has, however, put us into a 4A category, which is the bigger schools that we can compete against. And oh boy, there was doom and gloom about going into 4A, because we only had like 3 students over the cutoff point. And as you all know probably, that our boys won the state soccer championship this year over Gillette, and they were really the underdogs, and we can compete against the best of them. So we haven't really, Gary, had to worry about competition from the schools. I think they all provide a unique environment for kids. And there are children that we can't serve as well as another school would. I would say, though, that special education kids are best served in our local schools, in our public schools. Not very long ago, I looked at a check that we were providing to CBAR-V for a child that was almost $90,000 for a year. And the private schools simply can't do that. And that child had such disabilities that they absolutely needed to be in 24-hour care. So because we have to provide equity to every child, we pay for that child to be at CBAR-V, and of course the placement is done with parents. So we have to deal, as Gary said, with all comers. We have 8 high school students this year that are first year in this country. At my table, we were talking about the ACT. Every Wyoming junior in high school has to take the ACT, and that's one of the ways the state determines how well the schools are doing. And there's some argument whether that should be the test or not, but it is. And so those kids who are juniors, they may not have been speaking English for more than 6 months. They take the ACT along with the rest of our kids, and we still have the highest scores in the state. So we think we're doing a pretty good job of that.
All right, Chris, I'm going to sort of be a bad person and cut you out for 1 sec, because I want to see if we can get some questions, because we only have a couple minutes, and I want to see if the audience has anything. So, are there any questions in the, and I apologize. Are there any questions? Are there any questions in the audience that anybody has?
I wanted to ask about the importance of coding.
The importance of coding, I think. Was that the question?
Yes.
Well, it's evidently important because the legislature told us we shall teach coding in the elementary school now. I have no opposition to that because we were doing it before anyway. Here's the problem, is when the legislature continually decides to add things to what we're supposed to do. You heard me say that by 3rd grade we want to get kids reading. That is absolutely the most important thing. You can't teach a kid to code if they can't read. So to the extent that it diverts us from the very important focus that we have on reading, writing, and math, I wish they would talk more to school districts before the legislature went ahead and added something to our plate. Many years ago, probably when a lot of you and I were in elementary school, there was like, 4 things schools were required to do by the government. Now there's like 5 pages or 6 pages. I mean, a huge list of things that we are required to do. So the more that happens, the more your focus gets a little scattered. And I'd like to just remain focused on those fundamentals.
What we have done, because we needed to look at it, is develop a 3 to 5 year strategic plan with technology. Looking at not only what is it that our students need to be able to demonstrate in certain grades, but then also what is our infrastructure? What are the kinds of programs and those kinds of things that we're utilizing? Even though we're utilizing a lot of things right now, we want to get consistency and we want to have alignment. The other aspect in terms of coding, one of the ways that we do it is through our robotics. That robotics program is really strong and healthy, and it allows our students to be able to participate and utilize that skill. We have not had that as something being asked of our schools at this particular time.
That's great. One more quick question I think we have. So let's go over here to Phil.
Phil Cameron, I'm a resident of the town of Jackson, and this is really a question about early education and childcare, pre-K particularly. For the hospital as a major employer in our community, both school districts as large employers, but also the recipients of graduates of early childcare. What can, not just your organizations, but we as a community do to address, I would say, pre-K educational access and instability? For working force families, that's one of the major stressors in this community, is not just the cost, but being able to get into a viable program, and I think it's a bit of a sleeper issue in the community.
So the question was about pre-K education, what we can do as a community to foster that. We have like 1.5 minutes, so if you can all answer
No
pretty
problem.
quickly, that would be great.
Well, we as an employer started daycare this year. We have 45 babies on average a year in our school population of teachers, and so we started a daycare this year because when we want them to come back to teach. And so we have 23 kids. We're maxed out, but we're hoping to expand that. It's cheaper than the going rate for daycare around town, and it follows a school schedule, so it's been great for the school teachers.
We have currently 90 kids in our daycare program. They get pre-K education while they're in daycare. And we have the need to increase that by right now 52 additional kids. We underwrite it to the tune of about $3,000 per employee. And we think that that is a way to enhance our ability to attract and retain good employees for the healthcare system here in Jackson.
Are you referring to employees having that benefit, or our students, our children in our community? I'll answer the second one. We have a pre-K program within our school district, of course through special needs and Child Find. You have to provide services to those children that you do find, but also we have non-handicapped or non-special needs children within that classroom also, because you need to have that balance and interaction and integration. So we do provide that within our school district for our children within our community.
That's all the time we have, so please everyone give a big hand to Paul and Chris and Kate.